At 21 years old, Jesse Livermore had already turned pocket change into $10,000. He was the legendary boy trader who could read the tape like a book and extract money from bucket shops with surgical precision. He was unbeatable. Until he wasn't. 6 months after arriving in New York to trade legitimately, Livermore was completely broke. The same system that made him a fortune in bucket shops left him penniless in a real brokerage office. Today you'll discover the 3 brutal lessons that transformed Livermore from a talented gambler into a true speculator. Lessons that separate the 90% who lose from the 10% who build lasting wealth. Drop a comment right now. What's your biggest struggle in trading? Picture this, 1907. A 21-year-old kid walks into A.R. Fullerton & Company in New York City, carrying $2,500 in cash. Not borrowed money, not inheritance. Money he won through pure skill in bucket shops across the country. Jesse Livermore wasn't like other young traders. By age 15, he had memorized price patterns. By 20, he'd accumulated $10,000. The bucket shops knew his name, feared his trades, and eventually banned him from doing business. He was that good. So when he arrived at Fullerton's office, a legitimate New York Stock Exchange member firm, he had every reason to feel confident. Same stocks, same ticker tape, same price movements. What could possibly go wrong? Here's where most winning traders destroy themselves, and Livermore was no exception. He assumed that because he understood one game, he understood all games. It's like assuming that because you're a champion swimmer in a pool, you can navigate the open ocean. Same water, right? Wrong. In the bucket shops, Livermore had been trading in a controlled environment. He could see a price of 105 on the board, sell instantly at 105, and pocket his profit when it dropped to 102. The execution was immediate. The price was guaranteed. He was betting on fluctuations, not participating in an actual market. But in Fullerton's office, something insidious was happening. By the time his order reached the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, that 105 price was ancient history. The market had already moved. His own orders affected prices. Delays cost him edges. The tape was no longer telling him the present, it was whispering about the past. Livermore later confessed something profound. He said, quote, "There is the plain fool who does the wrong thing at all times everywhere, but there is the Wall Street fool who thinks he must trade all the time." He had become a Wall Street fool. Let me show you how he climbed back out and what it cost him to learn these lessons. Principle number 1. Know which ocean you're sailing. Before you risk a single dollar, you must diagnose what kind of market environment you're actually in. Think of it like this. A speedboat dominates a calm lake. But take that same speedboat into the Atlantic during a storm, and it's firewood. Livermore's tape-reading system was a perfectly designed speedboat. It was built for the calm, controlled waters of bucket shops. The moment he entered the churning ocean of the legitimate stock market, his vessel was wrong for the voyage. Here's the mistake that cost Livermore his entire stake. And it's the same mistake that wipes out talented traders today. He saw the same stock symbols, the same ticker tape, the same price movements, and concluded he was playing the same game. It seemed logical. Sugar is sugar whether you're trading at a bucket shop or at a stock exchange firm, right? Wrong, dead wrong. Livermore himself admitted it. He said he was, quote, playing it ignorantly, not recklessly, not emotionally, ignorantly. He didn't understand that in a bucket shop, he was making a bet against the house on price direction. But in a legitimate brokerage, he was participating in an actual auction market where his own actions created ripples, where execution delays mattered, where the tape was always telling him yesterday's news. The professional does something radically different. Before deploying any system, any strategy, any edge, they ask, what kind of water am I in? Livermore eventually learned to distinguish between environments. In bucket shops, he could scalp ticks because execution was instant and prices were fixed at the moment of order. In real markets, he needed a completely different approach, one that accounted for slippage, for market impact, for the reality that the tape lagged behind the truth. This required brutal honesty. He had to admit that his $10,000 track record meant nothing if he was playing the wrong game with the wrong tools. The path to mastery wasn't through applying his old system harder. It was through understanding that different oceans require different ships. Let me show you this lesson in action. After 6 months of trading at Fullerton's office, Livermore had lost everything. Not just his $2,500, but additional money he'd made there. He even owed the firm several $100s. Most traders would have quit. Most would have blamed the market, the broker, bad luck. But Livermore did something remarkable. He went to old man Fullerton and said, "Lend me $500 so I can go to the bucket shops, win back a stake, and return to learn how to beat your game." Think about that. He admitted he had mastered one environment, but failed in another. He went to St. Louis, walked into J.G. Dolan Company, and in 2 days extracted $2,800 using his old system. Then he returned to New York to learn the new game. That's not ego, that's strategic self-awareness. But knowing which ocean you're in means nothing if you're constantly jumping overboard without reason. Because even with the right ship in the right waters, Livermore discovered he was his own worst enemy through one devastating weakness. Principle number 2, the deadly disease of constant action. The market doesn't reward activity. It rewards accuracy. Livermore learned this through pain. He said it directly. The desire for constant action, irrespective of underlying conditions, is responsible for many losses in Wall Street, even among the professionals. Think of the ocean again. A ship's captain doesn't sail just because the ship is capable of sailing. He sails when conditions favor the voyage, when the wind is right, when the destination is clear. Trading without proper conditions isn't brave. It's suicidal. Here's how this disease infected even the boy trader. Picture the scene. Livermore is sitting in Fullerton's office. There's the massive quotation board staring at him. The ticker is chattering constantly. People around him are buying, selling, watching their tickets turn into cash or waste paper. The action is intoxicating, he admitted. Of course I let the craving for excitement get the better of my judgment. This is the Wall Street fool's trap. You feel like you should be doing something. The market is moving. Opportunities seem to flash by every minute. You think, if I'm not trading, I'm missing out. So you trade. You trade without adequate reason. You trade without your system saying go. You trade because you're there, because you can, because staying still feels like losing. The professional cultivates something most people think is weakness, but is actually supreme strength. The ability to do nothing. Livermore revealed this lesson years later. He said that in 1915, he waited 2 full weeks while watching a stock he was bullish on climb 30 points before he felt safe to buy it. 2 weeks, 30 points. Every tick must have been torture. But he waited because he couldn't afford to be wrong. He stated it clearly. I had to be right, and so I waited. That is the transformation. The amateur trades because he's bored, because there's movement, because he thinks he must. The professional trades only when conditions align with his system, only when the wind is favorable for his particular vessel. Back to 1907. Livermore is trading at Fullerton's office and he's bleeding money, not because his individual trades were all losers, but because he was taking too many trades without proper conditions. He wrote about this directly. My plan of trading was sound enough and won oftener than it lost. If I had stuck to it, I'd have been right perhaps as often as 7 out of 10 times. What beat me was not having brains enough to stick to my own game. 7 out of 10. That's a winning system. But he was overriding it. He was trading when he wasn't sure, when precedents didn't favor his play, when he simply felt like he should be in the game. The bucket shops had trained him for constant action. In those shops with 1-point margins and instant execution, you played for quick profits. But that style was poison in real markets. So he had diagnosed the environment and learned to control his impulses. But there was one more brutal lesson waiting, one that involved ego, revenge, and the sweet satisfaction of adapting strategy. Principle number 3. Adapt your weapons to the battle your edge in one environment may be your downfall in another. Livermore's tape-reading skill, his ability to spot tick-by-tick movements and capitalize on tiny fluctuations, was a weapon forged for bucket shop warfare. It was perfect there. But in the legitimate market, where execution delays existed, where his own orders moved prices, where the tape lagged reality, that same weapon became a liability. The professional doesn't fall in love with their tools. They fall in love with winning. And winning means using the right tool for the job. The amateur makes this mistake constantly. They read about a strategy that worked for someone else, in a different market, at a different time, with different capital, and they try to copy it exactly. Livermore faced this. He had a strategy that made him $10,000. It worked 7 out of 10 times in bucket shops, so when it failed in legitimate markets, his ego wanted to blame the market, the broker, bad luck. Anything except the truth. The truth was simple but painful. His weapon was wrong for this battlefield. Reading the tape with expert precision doesn't help when the tape is telling you ancient history by the time you can act on it. The professional asks different questions. Not why isn't my system working, but what kind of system does this environment require? Livermore had to completely rebuild his approach. He couldn't scalp ticks anymore. The execution delays killed that edge. He couldn't trade as frequently. The commissions and slippage destroyed the math. He couldn't rely on instant fills at visible prices. The market was bigger than his orders, but his orders still had impact, so what did he do? He began learning position trading. He started studying longer-term movements. He developed patience not as a virtue but as a necessity. He learned to trade only when he had, as he said, adequate reasons and sufficient knowledge to make the play intelligent. The proof came in stages. First, after losing everything at Fullerton's, Livermore proved he still had his bucket shop edge. He went to St. Louis and extracted $2,800 in 2 days from J.G. Dolan Company. Same old system. Perfect execution. Then came the revenge trade at H.S. Teller's Hoboken bucket shop. Teller had refused Livermore's business in St. Louis. So when Teller opened in Hoboken, Livermore saw his chance. But notice what he did. He didn't just walk in and trade. He studied the timing. He waited for the perfect setup, a Saturday morning when the bank statement would give traders an excuse to hammer stocks down. He knew bucket shop customers would be long, and he went short. $5,100 in one morning. But here's the key. He used his bucket shop system only in bucket shops. He was learning, slowly and painfully, to use different strategies in different environments. That adaptation would eventually make him one of the greatest speculators in history. Let's bring Livermore's brutal education together into one cohesive lesson. His genius wasn't avoiding failure. It was learning from failure without being destroyed by it. The Livermore adaptation framework is a 3-part methodology. First, it begins with environmental diagnosis. Know which ocean you're sailing. Don't assume that because you succeeded in one market condition, you'll succeed in another. Different environments require different strategies, different time frames, different position sizes, different everything. Second, it demands impulse control. Master the disease of constant action. The market rewards the patient hunter, not the hyperactive trader. Trade only when your system gives clear signals, only when conditions favor your particular edge. Doing nothing is often the highest paying action. Third, it requires ruthless adaptation. Your weapons must match the battlefield. What worked in bucket shops with instant execution won't work in real markets with delays and slippage. What works in bull markets won't work in bear markets. What works with small size won't work with large size. Adapt or die. This is not a pattern. It's a survival framework. Here's what this really means. The 90% who fail see one success and think they've mastered trading. They take a system that worked once and apply it everywhere, in all conditions at all times. They're driven by ego, by the need to be right, by the inability to admit that success in one game doesn't guarantee success in another. The 10% who succeed do something different. They have cultivated strategic humility. They see the same losing situation and ask, what is this teaching me? What am I missing? How must I adapt? This framework transforms trading from a game of ego into a game of evolution. It is a methodology that accepts brutal truth over comfortable delusion. Now let me be absolutely clear. This is not easy. Livermore himself said, I didn't know then what I learned later. He lost everything to learn these lessons. Most traders never learn them at all. They blow up and blame the market, the broker, the system, anything except their own failure to adapt. This framework will not make you rich overnight. What it will do is keep you alive long enough to develop real skill. But only if you have the discipline to admit when you're wrong, to study when you're losing, and to adapt when your weapons fail. Most won't. Will you? So here's my challenge to you. Right now, before you close this video, ask yourself 3 hard questions. First, which ocean am I actually sailing in? Am I treating swing trading like day trading? Am I applying small account strategies to large accounts? Am I using bull market tactics in bear markets? Write down your honest answer. Second, am I trading from strategy or from impulse? Look at your last 10 trades. How many had clear, predetermined conditions that justified entry? How many were just because you were bored, because something moved, because you felt like you should do something? Be brutally honest. Third, when my system fails, do I adapt or do I just trade harder? When you lose, do you study what changed or do you just assume you had bad luck? Real traders evolve. Gamblers repeat. Livermore spent 6 months and his entire stake learning these lessons. You just got them in minutes. The question is, will you actually apply them or will you go back to trading the way you always have? And for those who want to see how Livermore applied these adaptation principles to his greatest trades, including his $1 million shorts in 1907 and his legendary 1929 campaign, watch this video next. If this changed how you think about trading systems and market adaptation, hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into legendary trading strategies and the brutal lessons that separate winners from losers. Drop a comment. Which of these 3 principles hit you hardest? Environmental diagnosis, impulse control, or ruthless adaptation? I read every comment and I want to know which lesson resonated. Remember, this video is for educational purposes only. This is not investment advice. Livermore's journey involved spectacular wins and devastating losses. These strategies require study, practice, and discipline. Always do your own research, and never risk more than you can afford to lose.